Hello, everyone. I'm Kaya Ward, and I'm an associate, a licensed associate counselor and a research associate with the Mental Health Coalition. And the topic that we're going to talk about today is really special to me as a child and adolescent therapist. So I'm really excited to get into it. Today, we're going to be talking about conversations with teens. I'm joined today by Cheryl Eskin, Senior Director at TeenLine, a Dee Hirsch mental health service, and Justine Chiro, a listener at TeenLine. I'm going to give themselves a moment to introduce themselves, but just before that, I just want to say that if anybody has any questions during this webinar, you can submit them in the chat, and we're going to take a pause at 7:30 to start answering questions. So without further ado, Cheryl, do you mind introducing yourself first?
Not at all. Thanks so much, Kaya. I'm Cheryl Eskin, as she said, Senior Director of TeenLine, which is a program of Dee Hirsch. For those of you who don't know TeenLine, we are a teen-to-teen hotline where teens can call, text, or email and talk to a teen about what they're going through. We're based on the premise that teens are more likely to turn to teens when they're in crisis, and started 40 years ago, think that holds true. So excited to be here tonight, joined by one of our teens, and excited to talk about parenting. I have a 17-year-old and a 13-year-old of my own, so this topic is very real and relevant. So I'm going to introduce Justine, who is one of our teens who works on the line and makes the magic happen.
Hi, I'm Justine. I've been a listener, or I've been on TeenLine since the summer of 2020, so it's been a while now. And it's a really fulfilling volunteer opportunity that I've had a lot of fun with, and I've learned a lot about listening, and yeah, it's been really cool.
Thank you
And I'll
both.
put in there. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, and Justine's an 18-year-old senior in high school. So just so you know the perspective she's talking from.
Yeah. Awesome to have somebody who is so close to the topic. And thank you both for the work that you do and for being here today. So without further ado, I'm going to start with the first question. So let's start by talking about the difference between active listening and listening. And I'm going to take that to Cheryl first.
Yeah, I was going to say, to me, active listening. So listening is, you're listening. Maybe you're checking your email. Maybe you're on your phone. You kind of hear what's going on, but you're not necessarily paying as much attention as necessary. Active listening to me is when you actually take that moment, you take that pause, you put down your phone, you put down what you're doing, eye contact if appropriate, and you're really present with the person, like really listening to understand what they're going through, maybe have some empathy towards what they're going through, asking clarifying questions. You're in it with them, and you're just in a conversation. And we're talking about active listening for parents, but I think all of this is relevant to our other relationships in our lives as well, that we all do want to be heard. We want to be heard and listened to.
Yeah, totally. I will second that. And I love what you had to say about, it's about connectivity, right? Like it's, when we're listening just regularly, a lot of times we're doing other activities. We're not totally in the moment and maybe totally focused on every detail that that person is saying. Whereas like active listening, we're making that engagement, that eye contact, that, being present with the person, maybe like paraphrasing or like summarizing so they know that we actually heard what they had to say, asking more clarifying questions, like trying to get more details to let them know that like we're actually here with them. Justine, did you have any thoughts on that?
I think another important aspect is really paying attention to the tone of, well, for me, like the listeners calling in and making sure that you're either matching it and trying, if they're kind of mellow, making sure that you're kind of on the same level as them so that they can feel comfortable, or if they're kind of panicking, trying to talk calmly, and you can kind of ease them into a calmer state with active listening and with the way you're speaking to them. So I think that's an important aspect.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's spot on. I think that a lot of times when we're just listening regularly, right, we're not totally matching people's energy or like trying to see what their tone is and where they're at. And so just taking that moment to kind of like really touch in with them and like recognize where they're coming from, where they're at, and meeting them there. I love that.
And sometimes when you're in person, it's more listening to what's behind the words too, like the facial expressions, the body language, things of that sort, which again, if you're, not on your phone and things like that, you can tune into more.
Yeah. And I love that, like, because there's so many distractions, right? And like the phone tends to be a big one. Like I know I do it. Like I'm like on my phone scrolling and probably miss something somebody said. And so it's just like taking that moment to really engage with somebody, especially when like the topic is more serious or, it's regarding mental health or something that we really should be tuning into, like taking that moment. So next on our agenda, I'm thinking more about like parents and caregivers. So a lot of parents, and I hear it all the time, is like they say that their children shut down when they try to talk to them and they try to engage with them. What insights can you give, Cheryl, about like why this might be happening and what can we do to kind of prevent that?
Yeah. And I'm saying this as a parent, and my caveat will be, I don't believe there is such a thing as a perfect parent. I know a lot of this stuff. That doesn't mean I do it right all the time. But I think sometimes there's things we all do, myself included, that shut our kids down. And the first one may be too many questions. They come in our car or in the house after a really long day at school where it's been like, 5 or 6, 7 classes, tests, people, a lot of stimulation. And we start asking, how was your day? How was your test? How was this? Whatever it is, it's kind of overwhelming sometimes to answer so many questions, and then they might grunt, and Justine's smiling, so hopefully she's resonating. But sometimes they might just grunt and we get frustrated. You don't want to talk to me or tell me about your day. I want to hear. So sometimes overwhelming them with too much. Sometimes also we try to fix and we try to interject ourselves and give advice of what we think might be best for the situation. Sometimes our teens might want to hear that. Sometimes they just want to vent and listen and don't need us to fix. Same with also advice. Advice kind of goes into that fixing. I would also say, and I'm putting myself in it, we judge sometimes too. We judge, we minimize their feelings. Oh, it doesn't sound so bad. Oh, I'm sure you did great on that test. And maybe the reality is you have a kid who always says they fail a test and they never fail a test. But in that moment when they're really feeling bad, saying, I'm sure you didn't fail, or, you always say that, is probably not what they need to hear to make them want to continue talking to us.
I'm hearing a lot in there, like kind of knowing what they're looking for and what they need out of the conversation.
Definitely. And I do believe in asking sometimes, like, what would be helpful right now? Or, even in a moment, maybe not after school. I noticed when I pick you up after school, it doesn't seem like a time to talk. Would you, what would help? Do you need some space? Kind of owning that and not taking it personally, which is hard. I see my kids. I really want to hear about their day. I'm excited. I'm engaged. And it's not personal that well, maybe sometimes it is, but in general, it's not personal that they don't want to talk to me.
Yeah. So like teens, they have their own kind of world going on and, coming out of school, which is intense. Like you said, classes back to back all day. They have people talking at them all day. And then you get in the car to like almost an interrogation. I can see how that would be a lot. Justine, I did notice you nodding. Did anything that Cheryl said kind of resonate with you?
Yeah, I think it's really important that parents, like Cheryl said, don't take it personally when their kid doesn't want to talk to them in the moment. I think it's really easy to take that kind of stuff personally. I mean, teens can be pretty rude and also judgmental to their parents. But yeah, I think a lot of teens just like at the end of the day feel really drained and it can be really hard to talk. And I think a lot of the time they want to be able to share things on their own schedule, when they're feeling ready. And it can, I know personally, I definitely shut down when I feel like it's not on my own terms and I'm getting, a lot of questions asked at once. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. And this kind of leads into our next question, which is for you, Justine. As a Teen Line listener, can you share some of what you hear generally from teens having like conversations with their parents about mental health?
Yeah, definitely. I think most of the conversations I have with teens involve parents and issues with family in some way or another. And I think for some teens, the issue is that their parents either minimize or ignore their problems completely and will tell them it's not that big of a deal. And I think a lot of parents think that because their kids are in their teens, that it's there these issues, they'll just grow out of them with time and that they don't really need to address it because it's just, a phase or whatever. And sometimes that is true, but sometimes that can make the problem a lot worse and it can prolong it. So I think it's really important that parents take what their children are saying to them seriously, and address it, like they would with an adult and just treat them like a peer and an equal. And then another issue I've heard from a lot of teens is that they have talked to their parents about their own problems and their parents have gotten them help and maybe they've talked to a therapist or gone on medication, and when they start to feel better, their parents think that they don't need help anymore, and so they'll either pull them out of therapy or like take them off their medication or stop whatever treatment they're doing. And that's a big issue because they don't understand that mental health treatment is ongoing, and even if your symptoms aren't super serious anymore, it doesn't mean that you don't need the help. So like I've been hearing that a lot lately.
Yeah, two really valuable points. I think, with like the minimization of teens' experiences, right? Like a lot of times parents are kind of thinking in the future. And maybe like, they remember what it was like for them as a teen. They may have had a tough time and think like, well, I like got over it. Like, like it won't matter and when you're 30 or 40, right? But at the time, like that's that teen's world, right? And like that is what's going on for them right now. And so acknowledging that what is hard for them right now is hard for them. Um, I love that we touched on that. And then like the second point of like pulling teens out of mental health services prematurely. Actually, Cheryl, I would love to hear your thoughts about that and like how parents should address that with teens.
Yeah, that was so interesting that Justine brought that up because I didn't realize that. I mean, that totally makes sense to me. It wasn't something I thought of. But I think as a parent, definitely admitting or recognizing that your teen needs mental health support or more support than you can give can be really humbling and really make you think, wow, what did I do wrong? Or it's a reflection on you. So it can be hard enough to get your teen the mental health support they need and not personalize it. So I think sometimes parents they see an improvement, like, okay, we're done, we're good. They want to pull out to kind of save face, or, they don't have a problem anymore. It's again, this fix it mentality. But I think as Justine says, a lot of mental health is ongoing, which doesn't mean if you're in therapy as a teen, you need to be in therapy forever. But therapy can pulling out prematurely doesn't work. There needs to be, a proper termination, enough skills learned and coping skills and time to adjust to life in the new normal. Maybe you had a teen in a big crisis state, you got them out of the crisis state, and that's great, but they may need time to rebalance themselves or time to sit in it. So I think definitely involving the teen in their treatment of, when does it make sense to end? How are you feeling about this? And scaling down, maybe working towards, every other week or once a month, things like that, rather than just cold turkey. Because as adults, that's not fair. We wouldn't do that to adults, just pull the rug out from under them. I also think listening to teens about who they connect with is a huge thing. I hear that a lot, that a parent really likes the therapist, but the teen might not. And if the teen's the one who's, even if it's family therapy, if the teen's not buying into this relationship, it's probably time to look for a better relationship.
Yeah, right. Like therapy is a lot about building rapport. And if the teen doesn't have good rapport, it's going to be a tough time for them. Yeah, I hear that. I want to jump into this question because I feel like it's related, because I hear a lot about like taking the parents out of it and like not personalizing it to the parent, whatever's going on with the teen. And so I'm wondering, Cheryl, what would you say are some like do's and don'ts when it comes to mental health concerns with your children? Should parents share how they feel about their child's mental health? Should they keep themselves out of it? Should they just keep the focus on the child? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. And I think nothing is absolute, like you should always do this or you should always do that. But I think a lot of the times teens don't come to their parents because they don't want to overwhelm them. They don't want them to freak out, and they don't want it to make it about them. Because sometimes we do that. Oh my God, my baby is this what's going on? I can't handle it. It's too much, or I'm such a terrible person, or, we carry on to the point that our teen might be taking care of us instead of the other way around. So I think even if your teens come to you with something as horrible as not wanting to live anymore, which is the worst nightmare for any parent, to have a teen express that to them, being able to be calm and in that moment and not as reactive, I think is the biggest key. Because if you freak out, it's kind of like your teens going there too, and you're kind of sending the message you can't handle it. And this is maybe why they didn't tell you in the first place, because they didn't think you can they didn't think. And they know your lives are tough. They know what will overwhelm you, and often they want to protect you. So I think, sharing your feelings, like, I'm concerned about you, I'm here for you, I want to get you help. I think it's okay. Those things, or this is a lot for me to hear right now, but I'm going to be here for you. And maybe even taking a personal time out if you need it, rather than having that emotional meltdown, for lack of a better word, around your teens. And again, to what Justine said, matching your teen's tone. If your teen's telling you this pretty straight and you're hysterically crying, that's not really a match. If your teen's crying too, maybe it works that you shedding some tears. And same with hugging an emotion, like matching where your teen is. If you have a teen who's like, it's not that moment.
Yes, so really finding that balance and like connecting with the child in front of you, because every child is going to be different, right? Like one child might be really looking for that emotional connection, whereas like somebody else might be just looking for support. So just like kind of knowing what everyone's looking for.
Right, definitely. Which may be different from what you would look for in that situation too,
For sure. I love that. I guess to add on to that, anything that you would suggest for parents to refrain from?
And I think Justine talked about this, not minimizing. I mean, it's really hard to be an adult. I'll give you that. It's really hard to be a teen. I mean, school shootings alone, COVID, racial injustices, anti-Semitism. I mean, there's so much climate change. There's so much going on in the lives of teens right now. It is really hard and like existentially challenging in some ways. But we kind of as adults think it's not that hard because our lives are harder. So we try to minimize that, or we'll say things like, well, I did, I held 2 jobs and I went to school and I did this. I didn't have time to be sad or have mental health. And so I think refraining from those sorts of things, because then that just feeds our kids' belief that they're not worthy of getting support and they're a burden or a problem on you. And on that same line, just minimizing, oh, you're not really depressed. You're just, following your friends, or you're just making it up, or, any of those sorts of things. I would put those in, in the don't situation, but also put the mad too, which obviously I'm not anti like discipline or appropriate discipline. There's a time and a place for it. If your teen's coming to you in the moment of a really big mistake, it's not the time to consequence and yell and get mad at them. That can come later. Same kind of thing. And I know Justine and I have talked about this before, not analyzing or taking the other person's side, which is really easy to do because we can maybe know our child and maybe it was something they did that caused this situation to happen. But that I told you so mentality in the moment, not so helpful, or understanding the other person's perspective and, oh, they're bullying you because they have a bad home life, not helpful to your kid who's in crisis.
Yes, for sure. I think that, I liked what you mentioned about like teens being they're really taking in the environment. Teen mental health is, in a crisis currently. And we are having this webinar today in the wake of the Nashville shooting that occurred yesterday. And so, it's just, there's a lot that is impacting teen mental health right now. And there's like always a new news story regarding like shootings and things in high schools and schools across the country. Which is an additional stressor for teens. And so today we have, a teenager here. And so Justine, I wanted to I guess, get your perspective as somebody who, you know, is in high school, how these like shootings have an impact on you. How have you seen them have an impact on people around you?
Yeah, I think every single teenager deals with this issue differently. And I know a lot of people are really involved in either like on social media, very actively talking about the issues and sharing information with their friends, and others are kind of checked out completely because it's just too much for them to handle. So they kind of will take a step back and not even try their best not to think about it, even though it's constantly being talked about and like a real pressing issue for everyone. And I think it's important that we have spaces for teens to talk about what they're going through and how they're feeling and in reaction to everything that's going on, but to not force them to talk about it if it's not something they're ready or comfortable to do. And letting them know what resources are available to them inside the schools or with their parents, or whatever they need, and letting them know that that's available to them, but not there. They don't have to talk about it if it's too painful or too uncomfortable.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. I think it is really valuable, right, to like listen to teens, and I keep hearing that coming up, right, is like kind of following their lead, right, and having these difficult conversations. So for next question, sorry, that's my dog. What is modeling, and how can parents model open conversations about mental health with their children? And I'm gonna take that to Cheryl first.
Okay. I mean, I think our teens, starting as young kids, there's some study like our teens watch us drive as early as like 3 years old, which is kind of scary for some of us on the West Coast in particular, the way we drive. But our teens are always looking to us, whether we think they are or not, as to how we handle things, because we are their role models in the world. And if we, catastrophize or deal with things in unhealthy ways, that's how they may learn how to do it as well. So, which again, doesn't mean we have to be perfect. I have plenty of unhealthy coping skills, but I think trying to model, appropriate conversation, whether it's with our partners, whether it's with our friends, being there for people, how we cope with appropriate, how we cope with situations, even verbalizing things like, what, I had a really bad day today. I'm going to go, take a walk because I just need to blow off steam, things like that, that we're verbalizing out loud because our teens are listening, whether we think they are or, whether we think they are or not. Same things with kind of timeouts instead of reacting. It's really easy for all of us to react. So sometimes not doing so as well. And also just having, I really believe in open conversations. A colleague of mine said the best time to talk about mental health is when you're not concerned about mental health. So just having like modeling just open communication in your family, where they're, you're an okay resource, better than okay, a resource to come to, that parents have your back. I don't really believe we always have to like our children's actions, or maybe even our children in that very moment, but we always have to love them and unconditionally. I think that's an important part of modeling too, is like, I've got your back, we're in this together. I may be really angry, but I love you and we're going to be here. We're going to do this.
So really like demonstrating these conversations and being really like the role model, right? And like you said, like children are, and teens from a very young age are watching their parents, right? And they are kind of, I guess, crafting their understanding about these conversations based off of the conversations they're having at home with their parents first, right? I love that. And so I guess thinking about having conversations with teens about their mental health, what would you say are some first steps that a parent can take if they're concerned about their teen?
Is that me or Justine? Or is that me? Okay. No, I was going to say definitely clearing the time. I think a lot of teens, like eye contact is hard sometimes too, and just sitting face to face, having a conversation. So maybe building, whether it's driving or taking a walk or doing some kind of activity where it's more natural to bring up rather than, a whole conversation. I think those are good things, those are good things to remember. I think also being specific and not critiquey or not judgmental, because we can do that a lot, maybe have specifics. I've noticed, and I'm curious what Justine thinks about this, but I've noticed, you spending more time in your room. I've noticed you're not hanging out with friends so much instead of like, and kind of trying to keep the judgment or the tone out of our voice as well. And I think hopefully in general, even things like, hey, I went to this webinar tonight and, I talked about, I want you to know I want to be that person for you, and being able to kind of hear the feedback of the things we do that they may not like, which is hard to hear sometimes. But I also think that's part of modeling too, of, hey mom, every time I try to talk to you, you're on your phone. And so, taking that feedback and which doesn't mean we have to drop everything as soon as our kids want to talk, but maybe taking that of like, okay, in 5 minutes, let's do this together. So I'm curious what Justine agrees or feels like, or.
Yeah, I think that's all good information. I think, yeah, just like checking in with your teen and noticing if you see any changes in their behavior, and just really emphasizing that you're not judging and you're not mad at them for acting differently and, being off or however they're presenting, just letting them know that you care about them and their safety and happiness is your priority. And I think that's always a good thing, to let them know that you're not going to judge them, and whatever they have to tell you, you're going to just be there to listen.
And if you say you're not going to get mad, you don't get mad,
Yeah,
even if which is really hard. Again, I believe you can consequence maybe down the road, but if you're like, I promise you I'm not going to get mad, and then you blow up, that kind of defeats,
For sure, right? So like setting what your expectations are, where you're going to be at, and sticking to it. So I love that, because it is really easy to say and not, a lot harder to do. So really like meeting the teens where they are, listening. I love what you said about like making the conversation casual. Like it doesn't need to feel like a super serious thing. Like it can be like while we're driving down the street, just like a casual conversation about mental health and about how like things you've noticed. I really love that. And so we talked about like things that children do that are wrong. And so a lot of parents want to know that, like, how to let their child know what they did was wrong. But like what's the best way to react without like blowing up or, making the situation more difficult or like tenuous for them. And I'll send this to Justine first. I would like your perspective as a teen. What kind of things help between like your relationship with your parents?
I think a lot of issues that teens are dealing with, especially today, parents don't really have any experience. Either, they didn't go through it as a teen, or it's been a long time since they've dealt with something like that. So I think being honest about maybe not knowing exactly what the right step is to take, being honest with them and making it a process that you guys can work through together. And if they've made mistakes and done something that's wrong, like Cheryl said, holding off on, punishing them right away and reacting angrily, just leading with love and compassion for them, and, making sure that their mental health is your top priority. And then later down the line, when things have kind of settled down and you're in a clear headspace, you can decide to take whatever steps you need, like if, they've broken any rules or whatever they've done.
Yeah. So addressing the situation with love and then kind of like following up with consequences, it sounds like. I love that. I'm also wondering, like from Cheryl, your experience as a parent, um, sometimes in the moment, like those emotions do build up. How, as a parent, from a parent's perspective, like, do you take that moment or like address it without getting emotional?
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer that, but I'll also go back to the modeling piece, that modeling adults are human too when we make mistakes. I think that's one of the most powerful gifts we can give our children, is admitting we made a mistake sometimes. You know what? I didn't handle that the way I wish I had. I was really reactive. I told you I wasn't going to be, and then I was. I'm working on it, which again doesn't mean we give the power to our kids. It's just admitting we're human and we, could have done it better. I also believe like deep breaths are really good and taking that moment. Also having your own supports in place. I mean, there's a lot of supports when you have little kids, but then as it becomes to teens, there's not as much support. I was recently at a parent event where we were all chatting. It was like, oh my God, your child does that too. Your child does that too. Your child, and you feel so much less alone because it's easy to feel isolated and you're the only parent who's having this problem. So having your, supports in place. And, I love what Justine said about, I mean, part of, at least I see my role as a parent, is teaching my kid how to navigate the world. And so working together on what seems to be an appropriate consequence. It's really easy to be like, I'm taking your phone. But then I don't always know that that's the most appropriate. And sometimes teens will be harsher than we would have been. I found that as well. Sometimes when you have them dole out what seems to be a punishment, they may actually even be, more in line, or something that means something. Not always, but sometimes.
I really like that. I think especially with teens, like they're in a unique age where they're like not adults, but they do think about things critically and they have opinions about like what punishment should be, and can come to agreements with parents and things like that and have those like deeper conversations. And I think for bonding, they might not totally fully like understand where a parent is coming from if they just say like, oh, I'm taking your phone for a week. So coming to some sort of conclusion between each other, I think is like even better for the parental child relationship. Love that. So this is going to be our last question, and then we can jump into questions from the audience. So I guess, what are some warning signs and some things that should make parents feel a little bit more concerned? Should they look out for, as far as mental health concerns or suicide? And Cheryl, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think anytime someone's talking about suicide or not wanting to be here anymore, or no one would miss me and I'm gone, things of that sort, we do need to take seriously. I mean, there are teens who will joke, oh, I failed this test, I'm going to kill myself. But I do think those, and they don't really mean it, but you don't know. I think that's a good time to check in. Well, what do you mean by that? I'm concerned that you're talking this way. So any kind of really hopeless, helpless thoughts, like I said, thoughts of death, or hurting other people as well, I do think we need to take seriously and follow up on. Other things to look for, like change in baseline, like grooming or sleep or eating or grades or socialization, different from how they used to be. Like a kid who used to be really social and really involved, and not even including COVID, who now is always in the room and not talking to anyone, worries me more than a kid who was never really that social and is still kind of not that social. But we often like to say, I mean, trust your gut as a parent, but this also isn't necessarily one day. Like your A student gets a C on a test doesn't mean catastrophe. It's pattern over time, like a period of a couple weeks where you're seeing this. I also think if you can, keep a pulse on your kids' friends, make your home the place to hang out or know them, because I think your kids' friends are also a good guide. And like I said, trusting your gut as well. If you feel like something's off, and hopefully we're the person they talk to, but if we're not, making sure there's someone that they talk to. Again, going to that ego, like it really hurts if your kid wants to talk to their aunt and not you, but they're talking to someone, things like that. I don't know, Justine, what am I missing? That's anything.
Yeah, I think you covered it mostly. Just any drastic changes. Every teen's different. Some might start to be like leave the house more, and some might start to stay in. I think some teens will start to get in trouble a lot more. Like they'll have more outbursts, and maybe it might come off as anger. Or your kid's all of a sudden super aggressive, but really that's just kind of masking sadness. So if they're getting in trouble a lot, and things like that, making sure that you're trying to get to the bottom of that, and know that just they're not causing trouble just to cause trouble, and it might be trying to ask for help.
Yeah. So like behavior that is out of the norm for them, right? So I hear Cheryl like getting to know your teen and know what they're normally like, right? Know who they normally hang out with and like what things, how they typically operate, and recognizing when like you said, Justine, like things are off when they're doing something that's like outside of their norm. And for, like you said again, Cheryl, consistent amount of time, not just like a 1 day thing or like one event. Over time, you're noticing this shift in their behavior. And so I think that is like all valuable information. When teens do need help, I see this question in the chat, what would, and I'm going to open this up for either of you, what would you say is a first step to finding a therapist? Where should people start? I can actually take this one.
Okay, perfect.
To start, there are a lot of resources, especially MHC's website. We like link a lot of stuff for different populations, and just in like Psychology Today, ZocDoc. There are a lot of different ways to find therapists, accept your insurance or local or whatever specialty or anything that you're looking for. But MHC definitely has resources out there. Cheryl and Justine, do you have any thoughts about like finding a therapist for teens?
I was just going to add school. If you have, a counselor at school, a relationship with the school, they often have good contacts, or your pediatrician or family doctor. Again, they may have good contacts. And also sometimes word of mouth. I mean, asking among friends or peers or people who, in the community, but all those others are great, as well. I don't know if you want to add anything, Justine, or.
Yeah, I mean, for professional mental health treatment, I think the best resources are usually through doctors or the school counselors, and school resources are often really helpful, but also just like online websites, there's a lot of great resources that teens can just have in their back pocket, that aren't professional but can offer some good tips.
That's awesome. Yeah, school, I didn't think about that one, but that one is a really good resource. They tend to, even like school psychologists will probably have like a good amount of resources locally. And so while I have you both here, another question is, what can a teen expect when they call or text Teen Line? And Justine, since you work on the line, I guess we'll start with you.
Yeah, so first, when I take a call, I'll ask some quick statistical questions about like their age, their grade, zip code, etc. It's really a quick process. And whatever they're comfortable telling me, I will take, and if they're not, that's also fine. And then I just kind of will jump right into it and let them lead at first and tell me what's going on. And once, like I said before, I'll try and kind of assess their tone and their mood from how much they're talking or how little they're talking. And some teens are really ready to talk and just need someone to vent to, so I'll just kind of let them take charge and talk about what they want to talk about. But other teens are a lot more hesitant and reserved, and so I'll kind of try and lead the way and ask some guiding questions and get them to open up more. So it really depends on the teen and what the issue is. Also, if they are in crisis and suicidal, I'll first assess for safety and see how they're doing, and then try and mediate and ease their nerves before we get to talking about what's causing their issues.
Yeah, so a lot of that active listening, right? You're picking up on like their tone and their energy and like where they're at and trying to meet them there. Like you said, like some people are going to be more vocal when they call and like already kind of know where they want this conversation to go, what they need. And others, you have to do a little bit more prompting, a lot of like open-ended, like guiding questions to try to see what's going on with them. Yeah. Cheryl, any thoughts that you would add? Also thinking, so with like texting, how does that typically work when like a teen texts Teen Line? Is it like the same?
Yeah, it's the same. Oh, sorry. As I say, it's basically the same process as text, although we don't have the tone. So it definitely can be harder on our end to, build that relationship and see what's going on. Although for a lot of teens, I mean, our text volume is going up and our call volume is going down, which I think is reflective of where teens are. First of all, it's scary to call someone and hear their voice, them hear you. It's also the privacy issues, and they're not used to talking on the phone the same way we might be, some teens. And then also, I mean, text support, they could be sitting on the couch with their parents and texting us or in a different place. So I think sometimes people are more able to, get to it sooner on text. I don't know if Justine feels that way, but sometimes even the more significant things they get to sooner. But we go through the same process of empathy, active listening, coping skills, resources, the same sorts of things. Texts usually take longer because it's a back and forth. But I think overall, I mean, Kaya and I are both therapists and we're both wonderful, but there is something, we're based on the premise that a teen like Justine gets another teen in a way we can't, because she walks through high school every day and has lived through COVID and like what that meant and all those sorts of things. And obviously I don't want to overgeneralize, everyone's experience is different, but I think sometimes hearing from another teen, like, it sounds like maybe a good idea to tell your parents, or you deserve help, is more empowering than hearing it from me. And so sometimes Justine's more able to like, I really think maybe you should talk to someone. Hearing that from a teen is more powerful. Also just the power of like listening and someone listening to you and not judging. That's what our teens do.
Yeah. And that thought of like it coming from an authority figure versus a peer, right? It's definitely sometimes like more valuable for them to hear it from a peer. So wrapping up here, did anybody have any like last thoughts about listening, thoughts for parents, anything to add? Okay. Well, I really enjoyed talking with you both today. I hope that this webinar provided tips on how to have conversations around mental health with teens. A lot of this information can be used in other relationships, like you said, Cheryl, and can be used to just support people, listening empathetically, suspending judgment, asking how people are really doing, taking that extra step to like look at tone and energy and try to meet people where they are. And before we sign off, for people listening at home, there is a poll at the end. So if you could just take a second to answer the poll, we would really appreciate that. And thank you everybody for joining. Bye.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And thanks for being here, everyone. I know how hard it is to juggle everything.
For sure. Thank you, Justine.
Be here.